Hello, welcome back for this new episode of Secrets of Leaders. And today I am so pleased to welcome Michel Wozniak. Hello, Michel.
Hi, Jerome. Hi, everyone.
Thank you so much for being here today. We will talk about strategic thinking, but not only this, we will talk about all the tools that you mastered because you train in mind mapping, speed reading, memory, and NLP. And you've been trained and you learn from the best mentors that you have in those fields with Richard Bandler, who is the co-creator of the NLP, and Tony Buzan himself as well for all those mind tools. And also you learned so many more stuff, including AI. So I think it's best that you introduce yourself for the people that don't know you yet.
Okay, so just in a few words. So basically, I was an engineer in computer engineering. I specialized in AI. So for about 20 years, I'm in the field. I've been managing huge projects, like one, it was a 60 million euros project with 200 people on it. Then I decided to switch back to humans. I realized that technique is good. The technical things are good, but if it is to the expense of humans, it's not worth it. And in that project, after it went live, there was about 1,700 people who got fired because of the efficiency of the project. And at that moment, I had a problem with my consciousness. I didn't feel it was fair because for me, AI and all the engineering tools are here to help humans, not to replace them. So now
Mm.
I'm finishing also an MBA in artificial intelligence, and my goal now is to really spread the message about strategic thinking, about investing in yourself. And that's, I think, the a great opportunity. AI is a great opportunity because the first technology ever that pushes humans to look at them in the mirror.
Yes, because what was interesting to learn in another interview that I did with you actually
Yeah,
about AI is that AI has been built on mimicking the human brain.
yes,
So by doing so, we have to understand better
exactly.
how the brain works.
Yeah,
And I think that's quite interesting to do it this way.
yes, absolutely.
Mm. Um, you mentioned strategic thinking. When I think of strategic thinking, I think that's one of the most important tools or technique that a leader has to have to
Hmm.
plan ahead, to envision the project. But that's my own vision of strategic thinking. But what is your vision of strategic thinking? What is
Hmm.
strategic thinking?
Okay, so first there are two words, strategic and thinking. A
Mm,
strategy for me is a consistent way of doing something to get a consistent result. When you have a strategy, in whatever context you are, if you apply the strategy, you get a consistent result. Uh,
like a
that's
recipe. If I follow the
exact.
recipe, I have the same
Yeah,
taste.
yeah, a kind of universal recipe that works. We are
Mm,
all different, so there's in many respects things will be different, but there is always a common denominator that is always true, which is based on how the brain works, on our neurology, and this you have to master it because unless you don't have it, just like the foundations of a house, if you don't have the foundations, it cannot stay still. It will be shaky, it will not be stable. And then thinking is using our brains. Today with social networks and with all this, we tend to think less and less. It's really about scrolling, about just freeing our brain resources. And the problem is that the brain, I think, just like any muscle, the less you use it, the worse it becomes. And we have the responsibility today to really use our brains in a strategic way. So we have to understand how everything works, and then to use our thinking on top of that in order to improve all the strategies that we deploy. Yeah.
mm. So yeah, so I guess if we obviously as a leader, I want to be strategic. I want to find best strategies to achieve my goals and with my team. But that will rely on my brain and how I use it if I got it right.
Yeah.
So how that is that something that is, we often hear about nurture versus nature. Is it something that is only accessible for some people who understood their brain and were born like this, or can anyone can learn how to think better and use their brain in a more effective way?
Yeah. I think the answer is in the fact that you cannot learn this at school. School doesn't give you this because this is more something, in French, there are three words. There is savoir, it's knowledge. There is savoir-faire, which is the know-how, how to do things, and savoir-être, which is more connected to the attitude. I think
Mhm.
that school really gives us knowledge. And today, the reason why people often say that school is obsolete is because today knowledge we have it everywhere. So internet, AI, knowledge, and the know-how is very much available. But there is this part with the attitude, with the savoir-être. And this part, I think, is something that school doesn't teach, but something that everyone can learn. Strategic thinking basically is an attitude. It's not a set of tools.
Mm.
And even we're talking about here now all the Buzan technologies. Tony was very much aware of the fact that everything he's doing is not just a set of tools, like a toolbox where you just take the knife or the no. It's really an attitude that you have to develop, an attitude of curiosity. If you don't have curiosity, even if you know how to speed read, for instance, you will not read if you're not curious. With memory techniques, if you don't want to memorize things, you will not use them. So it's much more about the attitude. So I think everyone can learn it because attitude, yes, it's hard to develop. It's true. It's not something that you just go on a on a few hours training and then you have it. It's something that you have to develop in time, and that's why there is a lot of perseverance that you need to develop, and that's why also it requires proper training. It's not just watching a YouTube video and then yeah, you have strategic thinking. No, that's a little bit more complicated than that. Yeah.
Mm. But so yes, because for me, what you described is really close to what I call soft skills. That all
Mm.
those skills are non-technical, but you can still learn. And paradigm soft skills can be developed like in martial arts, through repetition, through habits, and through growth. For you, how can we develop these attitudes, these soft skills, even if it's hard? What is the strategy, the thing that
Mm.
works consistently to develop another attitude? I guess if the person wants to change it, because if the
Yeah.
person is not aware of their own attitude or don't want to change, it won't work.
Yeah. I guess there are a few pillars. For instance, you need to be able to manage your own fears first. That's very important because uh, if I fear that I will fail, I am conditioning my brain for failure. And this, there are plenty of studies on that. So this is very important. So you need to learn tools to manage fears. You need to learn tools also to be able to change your personal beliefs. If I believe, for instance, that I'm too old to be able to learn how to read fast or how to memorize, then I'm conditioning myself. Just repeat to a child they're stupid, they become stupid. And it's also true for an adult. Look at work. When somebody works in a very challenging environment with a boss that is constantly criticizing and being mean with someone, the person just gets depressed. They are not productive anymore. Everything goes wrong. So for me, those are basic attitude skills that you can learn through various techniques. There are soft skills, there is NLP, there are plenty of them. I think there is not one technique that applies for everyone. We're all different, but sometimes you just discover one and it resonates with you. And I think it's the way to go. Just trying, but always with this curiosity of asking yourself, okay, what can I do differently? What can I do better this time? When you enter into a company, and I think that's very important, the very first thing that people do when you enter in a company, they create for you a career plan. That's one of the first things. They show you, okay, in 40 years, if you stay with us, you will be here. And now there is this progression here that's sometimes linear, sometimes not. And it's required from people to have this mentality of progression. And the idea is to develop exactly the same thing. Because in life, if we don't have this mentality to progress, if you don't go forward, you go backward, in fact, because life is going forward. So if you're not moving, you're going backwards, in fact. And sometimes people tell me, yeah, but it's not important to work with attitude, but just look at the statistics of the World Health Organization, WHO. A few years ago, they have discovered that in the world, 1 billion children, which is 1 out of 2, are um, are suffering from bad behaviors, which may lead them to a handicap, to trauma, or to death.
Mm.
That means that 1 parent out of 2, so 50% of parents, have unhealthy behaviors with their children. So when somebody tells me it's not useful to invest into your own personal development, I say, okay, just look at the statistics. Just look at the statistics. What's the impact just in personal life? So it's even worse in professional life. So really for me, it starts with curiosity. Once you're curious about what you can do to become a better person, a better human being, then you find the ways. It's really about starting with that curiosity.
Mhm. Would you link this to the concept of growth mindset developed by Carol Dweck? That
Yeah.
the mindset that yes, we can learn anything if we want to, and with this constant actualization and not just stay in the status quo that
Yeah.
makes it eventually go backwards, but
Yeah,
to always push
exactly.
ourselves to go further. Further.
Yes, and because naturally our cognitive biases push us towards a fixed mindset. There is the cognitive bias of aversion of change. We
Mm,
don't like change because it's uncomfortable. But the reality is that in we grow outside of our comfort zone. So we need to be able to decide to get out of the comfort zone. And this is exactly the case when you're dealing with memory, with reading, with even mind maps. Mind maps are a great tool, but it's so unusual
yes.
compared to what we learned at school that
Yeah.
sometimes this lack of comfort, this kind of challenge is too high for some people. They just look at it and say, okay, no, I won't go there. No, I won't go there, even though they see that their current strategy is not working. And that's the paradox of human beings. So you need to
Mm.
have a conscious decision, a conscious desire to do things better.
Yeah, and thank you for making this transition for me because I wanted also to talk about those tools developed by Tony Buzan, so mind mapping, speed reading, and memory. And to what extent do you think those free tools are contributing to develop the better strategic thinking, a better
Yeah.
strategic thinking skills?
For me, they are completely into the strategic thinking field, and because I experienced that when I was working on that huge project, 60 million euros, about 200 engineers working on the project. Uh, I needed that. I needed mind map to structure my thinking. I needed speed reading to be able to take into account all the documentation written by the people. I needed memory techniques because when you have so many people, there is so much information that is constantly coming out all the time in the meetings, in the documentations, everywhere. If you just spend your time reading something and not remembering it, you'd better not read at all,
True.
because you have work to do also. So, and I saw that there were managers and leaders in the company who just decided to not read things. They were just asking people, okay, what's the most important to know about that? But they were not efficient. We went into meetings, they didn't have the information, they were lost, they were not useful for the project. It's terrible to say, but they were not useful. They were kind of obsolete because of their lack of knowledge and lack of information. And yeah, it was a problem. It was a real problem.
Hmm. And talking about speed reading and remembering what you read, because we can see now lots of different contradictory information on the internet about those areas, and I'm happy that you're here today also talking about this, because some people would associate those techniques, which is a brain training. So it's not just a technique that we say, okay, I read a book of speed reading, I can speed read now, I can read 10 times faster. That's it. It's a really a training of the brain that would help you develop some abilities that are not superhumans, just human abilities, but just enhanced. So yes, what would you say about this, about all those I would say myth that we can see on this in this area, and not just about speed reading, actually, also about
Yeah.
memory, to make it accessible to everyone. Actually, it's not just like an elite thing; it's actually accessible for everyone.
The problem is very much connected to bad marketing, because I saw already some videos about speed reading, about an American guy was just turning one page after the other, at this speed, and then, yeah, I know everything. And when you look at this, you can only laugh, and you can just say, okay, that's BS, okay? The problem is that sometimes people like to give false hopes. When I train people with speed reading, I don't tell them you multiply by 10 your reading speed. It's not the problem. It's not the problem of a number. Even if you double your reading speed,
Yeah.
that's wonderful. I can give you an example. When I was working on this huge project, 200 people were generating about 180 pages of documentation each and every day. Before speed reading, it took me 4 hours about to read that. And at the end, I didn't remember much. So I was losing half of my day by reading those documentations. With speed reading, I was doing it in 1 or 2 hours. It's not 10 times faster, but it was enough to completely radically change my professional life, because not only was I doing it faster, but also I was remembering more. So for me, the problem is really about the numbers. When people give hopes that you will make times 10, the problem is that people do not rationally consider it's possible. So then it discredits all the concept. For me, it's really not about speed, it's about efficiency. And that's why it's interesting, because in English, it is speed reading. In French, we often say lecture rapide, which means fast reading. And in the Tony Buzan group, they don't like that. They like to think more about intelligent reading or efficient reading. And that's so much more interesting, because, even with speed reading, perhaps you noticed, Jerome, according to how you feel, your speed will vary.
Oh, of
I-
course, yeah. That is not
yeah,
an absolute number. I don't just read
exactly.
at 800 words per minute. If I'm tired or if the text is complicated, obviously I
Exactly.
will read less fast.
Exactly. It can divide the speed largely by two,
Yeah.
between when you're sick, when you're healthy, or when you're happy, or when you're sad, because your brain doesn't work the same way. So it's really not about speed. It is about finding the right um, the right balance between speed and comprehension. For me,
Mm,
it's really about that.
mm,
And doing this is just like the guy who is running a marathon. It's not about running as fast as possible from the beginning. Those who do that, they just fall before the end.
mm,
You need to optimize your energy. So the one who knows that they will have to run 20 or so kilometers, they have to optimize their energy in order to maintain a level that will be optimum during the whole run.
mm,
And that's exactly the same with reading, with memory, with all this. It's really not about speed, it is about optimizing according to where you are right now.
mm. And there's a question coming from the audience, actually, related to what you just said. Is speed reading, that the practice of speed reading, healthy for our brain, or can it lead to brain fatigue or other conditions?
I think, according to everything, because I'm studying a lot, with academic studies, and what I notice is that, look, what's going on with a body if you're in a hospital and you are forced to stay in a bed during 2 weeks? What happens with the body? You lose your muscles. You're not really able to walk or hardly after 2 weeks. And third, there is a risk of getting, in French, it's phlebite. In English, it's phlebite. It's a sickness where the veins are being damaged in some way because of the inactivity. I think the human body and the human brain are basically made to be used, you know? Just like an engine. Sometimes you have a collection car and you say, okay, I will not use it. And you notice that after 6 months, you want to start it, it doesn't start because even the plastic pieces of the engine become hard and they just
Yeah.
break. We need to use the brain. So for me, it's really not about brain fatigue. It's really about using our body so that it stays efficient.
Mm,
And so for me, no, there is no problem with brain fatigue. But there will be problems if you don't use your brain. And
mm,
that's called Alzheimer's. Yes, it has a also um, genetic background and all this. But we know, for instance, in America, in some retirement centers, that when somebody has Alzheimer's disease and when they stimulate their brain on a daily basis, it limits the progression of the sickness. It is a physical degenerative sickness, so it destroys the brain. But the fact that they use their brain limits or even blocks the progression of the sickness. So for me, it's vital. It's really vital to use our brain on a daily basis as much as possible. And no, it will not be fatigued to the
mm,
point where it will be negative for the person.
mm.
Never.
Yes, what you said that reminds me of two punchlines that I have in mind. One is like for the muscles, use it or lose it.
Yes.
I think for the brain is probably the same thing. And actually, my kung fu teacher, Lipo Heron, which I interviewed also for the podcast Secrets of Leaders, often said during our session that um, motion is lotion. It's that's because you move, you're in constant movement.
Yes.
That your body gets all these that all it needs to be functional and to avoid aches and so on. And I think for this principle can apply for the brain, or
Yes.
constant motion in the brain, um, to have a heavy brain.
Yeah.
Mm.
Exactly.
So you have strategic thinking, you have all those tools. It seems that you are equipped for anything to tackle any challenge. And one of my favorite questions for this podcast is, what was the hardest leadership challenge that you had to face, and how did you do it?
Uh, in some way, I already gave a hint about it because I was talking about those documentations that were generated at work with on the project with 180 pages per day. I think that was the biggest challenge I ever faced, because when you're on such a project, you have no choice. People rely on you. You need to know the thing. You cannot just fake it, you know? You cannot fake it. And one of the big thing was that I knew the techniques like speed reading, but I was not applying them. And
Mm,
that's where the attitude enters. And at one moment, I reached a moment where I entered into a meeting. There were all the directors, all the managers, and I felt stupid because there were major things that happened the day before and I didn't know about it. I felt stupid. And it was risky because since I had to decide, I had to take a decision. I heard people talking about things I didn't know about. I didn't dare to say, "Okay, I don't know what you're what you're talking about, guys." But this was only because I did not have the information. So at that moment, it was the trigger. I decided, okay, now I will start using what I know. And it took like 2 weeks for me to start applying speed reading techniques. And in fact, I went from 4 hours daily to 1 to 2 hours daily, which was a game changer. It was really a game changer, not only personally, but especially for the team, because now from that moment on, I had the information. I was prepared. I could take better decisions. I think it saved a lot of money for the company because the decisions I was making were much better organized, much better structured. So for me, that was the
mm,
solution I gave to that challenge, which was very, very, very impactful. Today, this project saves about 200 million euros per year to the company. And I think that in some way, those numbers are also connected with that challenge and with the way I decided to handle it by simply taking the responsibility. I could have continued to ask my guys, okay, tell me what's the most important, but it would not have been a long-term solution. It would have been just a kind of a temporary solution to not feel stupid during meetings. But in this case, it was really the thing to do. In fact, yeah,
mm. Super interesting. Thank you for sharing. I think that was quite inspiring, and I think in a lot of ways, people can somehow identify themselves in the stressful intellectual challenge and feeling overwhelmed. But as you said, it's not just about the tools or the techniques; it's a will, it's an attitude towards it, and to apply it in the situation.
yeah,
And yes, there's another question actually, and I think that would be a good way to conclude this interview by opening up to another subject that you love, which
mhm,
is AI. Because yes, we talk about using the brain, training the brain, but yes, we are in an era there where we kind of using it less actually,
yeah,
because AI is facilitating so much now, even the thinking, even the creative process. So how to what extent how the AI is impacting the way we use our brain, and how should we do it in knowing this now?
yeah. It impacts it in a lot of ways, but it's like everything. You can use it the right way or the wrong way. The wrong way is, for instance, if you have to do a research work on something, is to ask ChatGPT, okay, do the research work for me. Because at that moment, your brain doesn't work at all. A few years ago, you had to go to Google, you just put some keywords, you had like 100,000 answers, you had to make your way through it. So you were using your brain. But now, if you ask ChatGPT to do that for you, you're not using it. But there are some very interesting ways to use the AI more intelligently. For instance, in ChatGPT, you can create a master prompt. It's a prompt that is always being used. It's in the parameters. And the master prompt that I'm using for myself and for my children is whenever somebody asks a question, never answer directly, but answer by questioning the person about what they already know about the subject and complete the answers. And this is great because if you ask ChatGPT without that, okay, tell me about AI, it will give you a complete review of AI. But now with this master prompt, when you ask, okay, tell me about AI, it will say, okay, tell me first, what do you already know about AI?
So
Perhaps
that's ChatGPT asking you, the user, the
exactly,
question, what do you know already about it? Okay.
exactly. It's challenging me. And perhaps
Okay.
I will say, okay, AI is an algorithm that, and then it will say, no, AI is no algorithm. AI is the opposite of an algorithm. And it will explain. And then I will ask, well, what do you mean by that? And you know, I am
Mm,
making my way through it. But if it had given me the information in a very blunt way, I wouldn't have worked my brain at all. So it's not about the tool itself, it's about how we use it.
mhm,
It's like everything in the world. It's how we use things. So for me, the most important idea when I use AI is how can I use it to help me challenge my own brain? And
mm,
at that moment, yes, it is useful. But we have cognitive biases that force us to go towards what's the easiest for us because
mhm.
our brain wants to save energy. So you have to consciously go against what you would naturally would like to do. And this is the hard part. But it's just like everything, just like sport. You don't want to go every day to run or to walk or to go to the gym, but you just define a habit and you decide to stick to it, and that's it. So for me, it's the same. It's the exactly the same kind of routines that you have to do for your brain, the same thing as you do when you're working on sport or daily activity. It's exactly the same. It starts with a decision.
I think that's a brilliant way to conclude this interview. Thank you so much. I think people loved it. Thank you, Nadia.
Thank you.
We're happy with the answer that we shared. So, for the people who want to know more about you, they can find you on LinkedIn. They can
Yes.
find you on your website, Optimistra,
Yes.
if I'm right.
Optimistra.com.
Yes.
O-
So,
Optimistra.
yeah, so I will add everything onto the description of this on this episode. Thank you so much, Michel,
Thank
and
you,
talk to
Jerome.
you for maybe another interview.
Yes, with pleasure. Thank
Thank you.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye.